All right, we'll see how this goes. It seems kind of loud. I've been teaching for a long time, and at some point got away from the sort of 45-minute straight talk lecture deal. But yet, that's the format for this evening, so I'm going to try not to bore you too much and run through a conversation. So, as Dr. Iverson said, here at UT, I'm in African and African Diaspora Studies. I actually went to school here a long, long time ago when this room looked different and when Speedway was a road that went all the way through and stop signs and traffic, and the campus looked much, much different than it does now. Went away for a couple of years to Southern Illinois, was invited back as a professor. That was 2005, and so here we are today. When I first came back, I'm an educational anthropologist, and I came back just knowing that the community would just be ready to welcome me with open arms. I'd get into the schools, I'd have this great time, and what I found was that having a Ph.D., after your name or doctor before your name is nice, but you really have to earn your way into community. And so I spent a couple of years really just as a servant to the school district, to kids, to teachers, getting in where I could fit in and sort of, making space for myself. Over the years, I've done a bunch of different things, and as was mentioned, primarily oriented towards the application of knowledge discovered to immediately solve problems. I'm a person that, in one respect, believes that the world is beautiful with possibility, but I think the world's pretty crappy in many, many respects. Wealth inequality, human misery, schools that don't do what they're supposed to be doing, bad things happening, and it's just completely unsatisfying to just collect a paycheck, write some articles, and just kind of do my thing. So I'm interested not in, as some of us are, knowledge for knowledge's sake. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I'm interested in knowledge to help make things better now because I'm just so thoroughly dissatisfied. So over the years, working with the kids in high schools, showing kids around campus whenever I can, going away to DC, you all were, I guess, coming of age or a bit younger when President Obama came into office, and I was a person who never thought that something like that was possible. And so, with tears in my eyes, I'm going to go to DC somehow. And worked my way and fought my way and eventually found myself as an executive branch policy fellow working in the National Science Foundation doing work there. When I came back, I had a continued interest in application, but I had a new sense of sort of purpose or mission around not just this applied work, but also the dissemination of knowledge to broad popular audiences. There's so much that goes on campus that's just beautiful that you all get to benefit from. But that too is an expression of privilege that isn't widely available, and it could be widely available. So I began to turn towards thinking about how to sort of get knowledge beyond the academy, which is when I started a television show with PBS across the street. And that television show is called Black Academics. So there's a lot of things over the years that I've done. A lot of privilege being a professor. Once you get tenure, a lot of earned freedom that is also an earned responsibility. So on one hand, you get to do things that other people above you in the administration may or may not quite get. But the process of vetting you and having you sort of go through the paces and go through the rigors so that after so many years they say, you know what, you are tenurable, you are tenured, now, sort of go forth. You now get to really, if you live into it, explore possibility. So I never thought that I would be the executive producer of a nationally broadcast television show, and yet here I am, largely because of the privilege of the university, the earned privilege of tenure, and the wonderful resources we have here. So, and with apologies for this kind of clicker doing its thing on its own, we'll talk tonight about belonging, we'll talk about engaging, and we'll talk about caretaking. And I want to talk about and focus on you for a minute. So when I talk about, or when we talk about belonging, there's a couple of things that I think it's important for you all to understand. And for some of you, this is like a no-brainer, you get this. But there's folks among us, and I came up like this, where at some point you began to have questions about really your presence on your home campus. So a first thing to say about belonging is that each of you should recognize that you have significant discernible strengths. But even as you have significant discernible strengths, you do not all have the same strengths. This thing is just taking off, isn't it? Just as you have discernible strengths, maybe subject area like burgeoning expertise, maybe passion in an area, maybe a skill that others don't have, maybe a sort of intestinal fortitude or drive or determination that really sets you apart. There's just different things that make each of you special. But even as there's things that make you special, things that are your strengths, I guarantee no matter how brilliant you feel that you are, you have things to work on. But here again, the things that you have to work on are not all the same. Some of you come in to the university and you got like a 4-point cajillion GPA. You've been getting A's since you were in diapers. You're just brilliant. You've got all these great grades. Everybody loves you. But there are other sides to who you are, who you've become, stresses that you feel that are basically hidden. And all anyone ever sees is how brilliant you are. And the bravado that you wear every day is how you've got it all handled when there's really stuff going on. Is that anybody in here, do you suppose? Yeah. But then there's somebody else who's in here, and you have worked so hard to get here. And you basically worked against odds. You got here despite the fact that your physics teacher was a permanent substitute, and you really never got quality physics instruction, or biology or chemistry or whatever. You have this determination, you have this drive, you have this work ethic. You made it here. But even though you sit in the front row of the classroom, and you study as hard as you can, and you work your butt off, the reality is this person next to you snores through class. Not just sleeps, snores through class, and is getting 99s, 100, and it's just so easy for them. And you begin to doubt yourself. Do you suppose there's anybody here that deals with that? Some of you worked incredibly hard to get here. Everything looks great on paper, but you are still dealing with the post-traumatic stress of being in a high school where everybody was running over everybody else to get to the top 6%. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that the drug use in your high school was off the charts, because in our beautiful Shangri-La of a wealthy suburb, all of our kids are excellent and nobody does bad. Much more seriously, nobody wants to talk about self-harm. Nobody wants to talk about suicide rates in your high school, even though you know somebody. Can you imagine there's anybody like that here? So there's this range of stuff, there's these range of strengths that you have coming in, but there's all sorts of stuff that you all are dealing with. But the final piece of it, strengths, challenges, is that what you need to know to your core, two sides of one coin, and that is that you belong here. You need to know that to your core. That the folks that designed our admissions process, the folks that are running this university, did not make a mistake. And you belong here. And the flip side of that, the other side of the coin, is that all of your neighbors, all of your classmates belong here too. And I would be the first to say, how dare you ever challenge or question the belonging of a fellow Longhorn. Does that make sense at all? Are y'all awake? I come from a line of like preachers and teachers. So the teacher side is the teacher thing, but the preacher side is I'm used to amens, hallelujah, snap, whatever. So if you're with me, I don't mind hearing. So if you're here, you belong here. If you see your classmate, your neighbor, they belong here as well. And that should come and go without saying, but the reality is that from outside of our university, there are people that every day chip away at our notion of family, our notion of community, our notion of belongingness. And I would encourage you to reject that and understand the power of what it means to be at this university. The privilege that it is, the responsibility that it is, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but also the sheer basic fact that you all belong here. Sometimes folks say, well, student athletes, they didn't have the GPA, they didn't this, they didn't that. If you're a student athlete here, you basically have two full-time jobs. I know this personally, lived it personally, and lived a reality where even when I was on the books and studying and doing what I was supposed to do, I still actually spent more time practicing and competing and traveling than I did doing the narrow academic work. Even at times when I wanted to do the academic side more, my responsibilities to my job, in a sense, meant that I was going to be distracted. So I see a student athlete, and what I see is someone that not only belongs here, but someone that is going their own tough route. Some come from the valley, got family at home saying, I don't want you to go away, I want you to stay here. You're dealing with those pressures, and you get here and you're questioning and belonging because it's a radically different space. Some from out of state, some international students dealing with just the feeling of this just being a radically different space. You two belong. Some folks are looking at folks and saying, you're the silver spooner. You had everything given to you. You ain't special. It doesn't mean that much that you got your 4 point whatever GPA because you had a building where the average years of teaching experience were 14, 15 years. My school, 1.5, 2 years average teaching experience, had new teachers every year. You didn't do what I did. No, you don't get to say that. Every one of us comes through dealing with just different stuff, and we all belong. I can go on with this sort of examples. Since the slides really want to go forward, I'll do that. And turn the page to the notion of what it means to be successful here once you understand that you belong. What it means to live into that. And the easiest invitation, the quickest reality is that, well, what I do is I go to class. And going to class is great. And going to class is a starting point. But what you'll discover is that some of the best experience you can have and the learning that you will do and the stuff that sets you up for success on your own terms will be stuff you do outside of the classroom. Stuff you do with other faculty, stuff you do with one another. And so I'll just run through just stuff that just happens on campus. And I'll start with Black Studies, or I'll focus in on Black Studies. So just my peers in the Gordon White Building. So this is the art galleries at Black Studies. Do you know that we have a state-of-the-art, several $100,000 worth of, HVAC units and things that control humidity and things that control lighting, this beautiful state-of-the-art gallery right in Chester? How many of you have been to this? A couple. You should check this out. It's right across on the second floor, coming out of one of those cafeteria doorways. There it is. That was started because we had a director of the Warfield Center for African Diaspora Studies, or African American Studies and Research, who is an art historian and had an idea that we should be a repository for art. So she raised the money, she had the conversations, she talked to the different folks, and then lo and behold, we have this beautiful gallery on campus that, when I say it's state-of-the-art, part of the benefit of the reality of that is that there's many exhibits, many pieces of art, many, whether it's photographic, visual, whatever the types of art, that folks would like to see in a given city, but they can't bring it to that city because they don't have galleries up to the professional standard necessary to guarantee the safety of the piece. Does that make sense? So here you are in Chester, and I hope the smell of Wendy's doesn't waft in and ruin things or whatever. But here you have in your dorm a gallery that can bring in pieces from across the globe, when many places never get to see these pieces of art. Our Gallery of Black Studies loans pieces to the Blanton to help you put things into perspective. My dissertation chair, 472 years ago, well, I guess that doesn't work because the university was started in 1883. So sometime in the past, my dissertation chair was Dr. Edmund Gordon. All right. When I was here as a student, he wasn't the most popular guy on campus because he was too much of a radical. And some folks didn't like his politics, as he sought to sort of tell the truth about our university, tell the truth about ourselves to ourselves and to others. Over time, let's go back. Over time, he earned his way, became a tenured faculty member, directed a center on campus, then became chair of a department, founded a bunch of programs, and now he gives this racial geography tour. And if you haven't taken this sort of alternative tour of campus, I implore you to do so. If you want to understand the significance of the Longhorn and the connection between Littlefield, who was George Washington Littlefield, who was one of the earliest really powerful benefactors of the university, and how he made his money, and how he, as a Confederate, and a Board of Regents that were all sort of post-Confederates, sought to raise up the university so that the sort of South could rise again. He made his money first in cotton, but then switched to cattle. The fact of his ability to raise cattle and drive them up north and then have them put on trains had everything to do with the federal government's presence, which on one hand cleared out the area of the native population, on the other hand slaughtered buffalo so that we had the grasses, so that the Longhorn could be moved up and put on the trains and gone to wherever. So the Longhorn is of special significance in that it was part of what built up his wealth so that he could then build his house right across the way here on the corner of 24th and White. This was a big red building, the Littlefield Mansion. That was his home. He loved the university so much that he built his home right across the street from the edge of the 40 acres, which is what, 24th Street. By the way, just on the other side of that, have any of you seen Mary Gearing Hall? Or Anna His Gym? Does Anna His Gym even exist anymore? Kinda, sorta. And the women's dorms. So we had this kind of women's campus with home ec and stuff, and then we had the men's, or we had the rest of the campus. So Dr. Gordon, will take you on this tour that has you understand our university in a different way. Why does that Martin Luther King statue come up and how? Students did it. Why does the Barbara Jordan statue come up and how? Why are there all these plinths down the South Mall where there's these big marble things and nothing on top of them? And of course, those are the Confederate statues that were about 3 years ago. He could just, he's a vice provost. He's helping define what you all do here as students. And you just go to the website at racialgeographytour.com, sign up, look at it online, or go on the tour. Next slide. So a couple of years ago, when I got back from DC, I went to, or I didn't go. I was going to go, and I decided not to go. There was a TED event. Y'all know what TED Talks are, of course? So there's this TED event in Austin. I'm all excited. This is going to be really dope. And then there was 18 presenters, and 16 of them were white. And then one was like maybe, I don't know, something like me, and I'm like racially ambiguous to people, and then somebody else racially ambiguous. And I said, this didn't seem very cool to me, and didn't seem very interesting. So I got with some graduate students, and I said, what if we kind of do our own? We called it UT Black Academics. And we recruited a couple of faculty members, so we're going to do this thing, and we went right across the street. You know you have a television studio across the street, right? So we go across the street, and we say, can we, borrow some cameras and editors and studio people, floor manager, audio, video, and they said, sure. So we did that. We came back and we did it again. And after the second year, Austin PBS said, that was really cool. Do you want a TV show? And I said, yes. Because who wouldn't want a TV show? So 2011, we started Black Academics Television. We're now Emmy nominated. We're broadcast across the nation. 30% of American households, it's kind of like a happy face. Like from Maine, down the Mid-Atlantic, through the South, up the West Coast, and somehow we're just not big in Idaho. So there's like a big donut in the middle where we're not, and we'll get there too. So that's Black Academics. Next slide. What's cool about Black Academics is Jameson Pitts, who is now 3 years out from UT, and now is his own media company. He was one of my freshmen in my signature course, Promise and Peril of Public Education. Courtney Robinson, who does work diverting kids from the criminal justice system to alternatives, was one of my students. She's now Dr. Robinson. Kendra Chambers, who was one of my students years ago, is now my full-time assistant producer. Denise Hart is one of my coaches, and I actually fly her in from Howard University. So as we do this, oh, and there's one more. Sorry, but I'm going to stay in front of this because this is goofy. But Darnell Porter, who is my photographer, who comes in each year, was also a student here, now a professional photographer. So you can see this seamlessness. You remember me saying something about how the work that you do is not just the classroom work that sets you up for success, it's the work outside and getting to know your professors and finding your passion and matching those with professors, their passion. My job is to be effective in the classroom, but my side gig, my side hustle, which is just as fun, if not more fun, is to support my students in these sort of passion projects. So these were presenters last year, or that we just shot. By the way, speaking of amazing people, this is Kavika Smith. He is a 17-year-old from Crenshaw. I wish I met him in time for him to apply here. he came to us, or I flew him in to speak about the face of homelessness. He's a straight-A student who was for 2.5 years homeless with his mom, who was working full-time, and in the context of LA, working full-time doesn't always mean that you can make ends meet. Rocio Villalobos, East Austinite, one of my students here, now has a master's degree and has moved on, brought her back. Dr. Rod Schoonover, who I'll talk about in a minute, and I guess I'm supposed to go on from that slide. You can go to the next one. Somebody shout out the time. What time is it?
7:34.
7:44?
7:34.
34. Oh, good. I got you longer. Okay. So another passion project is the Rather Prize in Education. Hopefully some of you recognize Dan Rather. Just like give me thumbs up or show me hands if you know who Dan Rather is. Like 7 people. I want to cry. So there was this guy, and he went to public schools in Texas, and he was a television reporter, and he was on the front lines, embedded with soldiers in Vietnam, shooting from Vietnam. He was present when Kennedy was assassinated. He was the person who, back in the days when you had 3 news anchors, CBS, ABC, NBC, you had the nightly news. Americans turned to their nightly news as the authority figures. Wasn't anything like this current day where everything's kind of a free-for-all and people are fighting and arguing. There was this sense of sort of gravitas and authority, and also welcoming into your home of these kind of authoritative voices. So Dan Rather, after being a reporter for so many years in the field, becomes an anchorman and is a sort of preeminent anchor. A few years ago, a family member of the Rathers asked if I would take Martin around. And Martin was this kid who got into Rice and Yale and UT and a couple of other places. And so I just showed Martin around, hoping he was coming to UT. He didn't. He went to Rice. I'm sorry. While he was there, he went to his granddad and he said, "Granddad, can I start this education prize?" So he said yes. We gave him $10,000 to start this prize. And so they were giving out $10,000 for the best idea to innovate Texas schools. Freshman, sophomore, junior year, Martin's doing his thing. Senior year, he kind of falls off the rails. Then he goes to Columbia School of Journalism and sort of forgets about the prize. Papa pulls him to the side and he's like, "This is unacceptable." And they want to redo the prize. They want to re-up the prize. And so Martin says, "Well, what about that guy from UT?" And so they kind of came back around, and all of a sudden this amazing opportunity just kind of came back around. And so what we get to do, although we didn't get to do it today because of the cancellation of South by Southwest and South by Southwest EDU, today was the day at 11 a.m. when we were going to announce the winner of this year's Rather Prize. So again, same idea. Like, what does this have to do with being a professor? Nothing and everything. These are the passion things that I get to do as a tenured professor, but the thing is, students who qualify themselves through their hard work, through their dedication, through bugging me all the time, end up working with me. And sometimes end up working with me for literally decades. I write recommendation letters all the time. It's a professional responsibility, and it's a big one, and it's a lot, and I write a lot of them. But I once had a recommendation letter written for me that just made me cry. And it was from my first research assistant, at this point, more than 20 years ago. And she came to school, and she had a difficult family background that she heroically pushed through while she was in college. She fell in love with a little boy, and they were all, like y'all are gonna do, fall in love with somebody, all that stuff. And when she was about to graduate, she really wanted to go into politics. And she said, "Dr. Foster, but I don't want to leave Pedro." And Dr. Koster said, "You're going to leave Pedro. You're You can have a long distance relationship, you can make it work, you can do your thing, but you told me all these years that you had this dream, and I really can't support or be behind you giving up on your dream. So I think you need to find a way to make it work. We had a really tough conversation. But I'd also known this student, this kid, for 4 years. So Taquia went to DC. Taquia worked her way up, literally like the pencil sharpener in the back of the congressional office, worked her way up to constituent relations. Then she's running constituent relations where they're writing the letters to constituents and corresponding with them. Kept working her way up, kept working her way up. Eventually came to work in the cloakroom of the Senate. The cloakroom of the U.S. Senate is kind of what it sounds like, the cloakroom, like where you would take off your coat and hang it up. Only there's a Democratic cloakroom and a Republican cloakroom. And if you are a senator, you go to the floor of the Senate through the cloakroom. So the cloakroom is actually the nerve center for the Senate for each party. It's where you check in, get your marching orders, get told what's going on the floor, check in with your speech so that it's all vetted, that sort of thing. She did that for several years. She also, lo and behold, I almost wrecked my truck when she said it because I was just in a different space and I didn't understand. She also was a Washington Redskins cheerleader all of a sudden. And I really didn't know what to do with this as this like respectability guy who had this idea of the way the world's supposed to work. And she said, Dr. Foster, do I have to explain to you what it means to be who I am and the things I want to do, da da da. And I said, yes, ma'am. And I kind of took my beating for being who I was, trying to figure this out. But she made me a promise. And she said, the day that being a cheerleader for the Redskins gets in the way of my career, I promise you I will quit on the spot. So the way, and I'm like choked, I shouldn't get choked up over this, but the way I knew that she got hired by President Obama to be his legislative liaison to Congress was when she called me and said, Dr. Foster, I stopped being a cheerleader today. So she quit so that she could go full-time to work for the president. So she was President Obama's legislative liaison. So if there's a senator or a congressman that wants to sit on Air Force One, that was Taquia, saying yes or no, basically. Whenever there were signings in the White House and they have like 472 pens and they're going to sign a bill, Taquia literally stood on the far side of the Oval, across from the Resolute desk, and managed the show from where she stood, as she kept everyone in line and decided where people were going to stand for the photo ops and all this. At any rate, I was trying to get a job somewhere or leave UT or something, maybe UT made me mad, I don't know. Taquia wrote my recommendation letter. How cool is that your students have come to a point where they are writing your recommendation letters? And Taquia said that in all of her years in DC, there was one person that she went to before she turned down or took any job, and that was Dr. Foster. So there's something sacred about being a faculty member here, or about even being a faculty member. There's something special about earning your way to tenure and earning the capacity to do things the way that makes sense to you. There's something sacred about the way that we get to work with you all. So part of your job is to do great in the classroom, but that's like the minimal threshold. Your next charge, piece of work, is to figure out how the rest of your life lines up so that you can live into the success that you define for yourself. Whether it's as a visual artist, whether it's as a scientist, whether it's as an astronaut, whether it's as a journalist, whether it's you're as a politician, whatever. It's a beautiful journey. It's a hard one, but it's one absolutely worth taking. All right. So I tried to talk a little bit about, Let's go to the next slide, see what we got next. We got a blank slide. Oh, okay. Go back to the blank. So, talked about you and your sense of belonging. Talked about faculty. And by the way, you know, Dr. Iverson, you made this wonderful introduction. The reality is, and this is so dope, the reality is that in my department, and I also have courtesy appointments in curriculum instruction, ed admin, and anthro. And if I walk into any of those spaces or in my own space in Black Studies, all of my colleagues are rock stars. I mean, truly amazing intellectuals, doing great stuff. So there's all this opportunity. With the opportunity comes responsibility. This is going to be a weird, abrupt turn, but we're going to make it anyway. So you all pay attention to the coronavirus, right? A little bit. So a lot of people were upset because the coronavirus has shut down things. I'm upset because something I was going to do really cool today got canceled. And then also something I was going to do next week that I shouldn't say anything, but was going to pay me a lot of money, that got canceled too, right? So it's like, yeah, we side hustle, by the way. You know. Love you guys, but you just don't pay us enough. So he said, don't look at me. I didn't do it. Bottom line is, you know, we're active in a number of spheres and get to do all these cool things. And so this coronavirus comes, man, this sucks. And then this coronavirus ends up shutting things down, and oh, this is getting even worse and worse. And how am I going to react to the idea that South by Southwest and South by Southwest EDU and a whole bunch of other things are getting shut down here and around the country? And so I just started reading, and I just started like looking around. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm not on the natural sciences side, but I can read a chart and I can read. And I came across this chart which showed two cities. This city, I think it's Philly. This city is St. Louis. And what happened over time, over just a couple of years during the 1918 influenza outbreak. And in the case of Philly, they had their first outbreak, or their first known case. And this happened a little bit before the first one hit in St. Louis. And it took them 2 weeks to have a public health response. In the time of no public health response, things were allowed to take off. And so what you saw was a death rate that shoots up. And then a taxing of whatever medical services are available at that time, and then a hard come down. And people were dying. In St. Louis, they had their first case, and it was 2 days before they not just had a public health response, they had a pretty drastic one. They said no big gatherings. And they went through a number of sort of protocols and put a number of things in place to try to tamp this down early. And what ends up happening is it still does spread, it still does go on, but you don't have this moment of high peak where all medical services are super taxed and now a whole bunch of people are getting sicker or not in a position to heal because they're not being taken care of. It's kind of stretching this out. So if you think about this in the context of today, by the city of Austin folk, and I talked to councilmen about this, and I talked to the founder of South by about this, and I asked them questions, and they kind of turned me on to a lot of this data. And they told me how they made a decision and why they made a decision, and it just made sense. That what we're trying to do in Austin and what the mayors around the country are trying to do is coordinate so that we don't get this Philly picture where all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of people hit. but rather through social distancing, people like in physical spaces, staying more apart, canceling some of the parties you want to have, not having these big, huge gatherings, we can slow down the inevitable spread. And part of the other thing that happens when you slow it down is we have time, or the scientists have time to come up with pharmaceutical responses, and then of course, eventually a vaccination. So what they're doing is being responsible. But responsibility in this case can be a double-edged sword, because if nothing happens, or if it's not that bad, what are you going to be saying at Thanksgiving? It was a hoax. It wasn't that big a deal. They overreacted. No, brother, you're alive. That's a good thing. But you can't prove, we get into this horrible problem where we can't prove that what we did worked because of the absence of your misery. So I'm willing to take that trade-off of the absence of my misery in exchange for some people sort of doubting. Does this make sense at all? So here's the thing. A bunch of young folk are saying, oh my God, I just made myself sound old. A bunch of young folk are saying, well, I'm not going to get sick. Or they're saying, I might get sick, but I'm not going to die from it. And the reality is you probably won't. But in the 2, 3, 4 weeks it takes you to start to show symptoms, you go home and hug up on your grandma. Or you pick up your niece for the first time. Or you basically interact with others and put others at risk. Does this make sense? I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just kind of trying to invite us into responsibility. Then in a myriad of ways, you are the caretakers of your own community, just as you are caretakers of your own academic and career futures. So I talked about you, I talked about faculty, I tried to shoehorn in a public service announcement, but try to do it in a seamless sense that talks about the reality of what it means to be here. That this is, as far as I'm concerned, and some people may say it's hyperbole, I don't think it is. This is sacred space. You going out and having fun, you being you at 19, 20, 21, it's sacred space. It's a privileged space. It's a space that you should also take care of and consider yourselves responsible for. You're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for your, fellow Longhorns. So with that, I'll, I guess, finish. Oh, let me do one more real quick. So a colleague at San Francisco State University, who is an evolutionary biologist, by the way, tweeted this out, and I thought this was really great, because what she did was she took this information that you can find in the proceedings of the National Academies of Science, and then she kind of doodled on it in a really helpful way that sort of makes it plain for people. And so one of the things that we try to do in the university, or should be trying to do, is take the knowledge, again, like with academics, and spread it out and disseminate it broadly in ways that are intelligible to the public. So I guess, in conclusion, in summation, in the end, take care, and last slide. Watch it. All right, thank you.